some Republicans pounced on this, the FEMA cash shortage. So Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, says this is easy. Mayorkas and FEMA immediately stop spending money on illegal immigration resettlement and redirect those funds to areas hit by the hurricane. Put Americans first. The Trump war room. FEMA has spent north of $1 billion resettling illegal aliens into America over the last 2 years. Meanwhile, the agency is out of money to respond to Hurricane Helene, which has left entire communities destroyed. This is a scandal that should end Kamala Harris's political career. Dan Crenshaw, unbelievable. Maybe, just maybe, the Biden-Harris administration should stop diverting FEMA funds meant to help Americans during disaster recovery to facilitate mass paroling illegal migrants into the country. Now, it's interesting. FEMA actually has, as part of its website, is a real thing, a rumor response. Again, this is how you know that we are in a decaying country. This is how you know that institutional collapse in trust of institutions is real. They actually have a devoted page on their website basically fact-checking the rumors that are out there. So that is the Hurricane Helene rumor response page on FEMA. FEMA says, rumor funding for FEMA disaster response was diverted to support international efforts or border-related issues, which is the accusation that those Republican accounts levied. They say this is false. No money is being diverted from disaster response needs. FEMA's disaster response efforts and individual assistance is funded through the Disaster Relief Fund, which is a dedicated fund for disaster efforts. Disaster Relief Fund money has not been diverted to other non-disaster related efforts. So Newsweek does a write-up, a more thorough write-up about this. FEMA tapped out for hurricane recovery as GOP points to $1 billion spent on migrants. So they ask, what is FEMA spending on migrants? The Shelter and Services Program provides funding to non-federal agencies to spend on humanitarian services for non-U.S. citizens. For the 2024 fiscal year, which ended on Monday, $640 million was made available. The FEMA website says this funding is intended to support U.S. Customs and Border Protection in the safe, orderly, and humane release of non-citizen migrants from short-term holding facilities. The money can be spent on a range of services, including food, shelter, transportation, acute medical care, clothing, and translation services. The budget for the past year was a significant increase from the 2023 fiscal year, when $363 million was allocated. Together, more than $1 billion has been spent on non-citizen services over the past 2 years. However, SSP, which what does that stand for again? Shelter and Services Program, is a small share of FEMA's overall yearly budget. For the new financial year, which began October 1st, the agency laid out a need for $33.1 billion. These claims are completely false, a DHS spokesperson told Newsweek on Thursday, addressing the accusations by Abbott and others. As Secretary Mayorkas said, FEMA has the necessary resources to meet the immediate needs associated with Hurricane Helene and other disasters. The Shelter and Services Program is a completely separate, appropriated grant program that was authorized and funded by Congress and is not associated in any way with FEMA's disaster-related authorities or funding streams. So, to render a judgment on that, what the conservatives are saying is not technically wrong. It sounds like if this was funded through sort of independent grants, there may not be a zero-sum quality where like money from the SSP is money that could not be spent on disaster relief. Then again, maybe it could have. I mean, you could always make that kind of argument, right? You could always make the argument that, well, in a government with finite resources, a dollar spent here is a dollar not spent over there. Their argument is always going to be, why spend a dime on any undocumented people? Now, so like once again, that strikes me as a political point. It's kind of par for the course that, especially in October, they would make those kinds of arguments. That doesn't really surprise me. I would say not necessarily false, perhaps slightly misleading and opportunistic, which again is par for the course. The bigger question, though, the more obvious question, though, is how do we as a society tolerate hundreds of billions of dollars going to fight foreign wars in Ukraine and Israel. And you have a hurricane like this, and FEMA says that their allowance for disaster relief is spent. Like, how do we tolerate that? How can a population be so dumbed down as to tolerate that?
Right.
The answer is evident in the Chapel Roan thing, where the libs lose their mind over a 26-year-old singer not bending to their will, and the Butler, Pennsylvania rally, where people are fawning at the feet of Elon Musk. That is how you get a population so dumbed down as to not revolt when a hurricane wipes out an entire band of the country and FEMA's out of money, but we're funding World War III on two fronts.
Well, and this is why in this particular section of the duopoly, they have to focus attention on the immigrant. It's an old tactic. It's an old tactic to distract from the ruling class, which has far more impact on the economic dislocation that a lot of these people are experiencing than the immigrants do. To blame some out group for this so that they don't come for the people on the hill. It's an old tried and true tactic that very often works. It's much easier to focus your ire on something tangible that you feel like you have a chance of fighting. To even contemplate taking on the real power, God, it's exhausting to even think about it. How would you do that? It's much easier to just go, God damn, they're taking our jobs. And listen, I have said throughout this crisis at the border, I do not believe for a second that they could not stop people coming over the border. We have the world's largest military. You could easily call that a national emergency and deploy the military to seal the border as a national security issue. Why, then, are they allowing that? I do agree that it is to destabilize labor. I believe it is to suppress wages. I thought it was very revealing when AOC in New York was saying, well, we have to get these people work permits. I do believe that's the end game. And they mask it in humanitarian intentions. You're talking about people who think nothing of funding a fucking genocide.
Exactly.
The idea that they want to allow migrants into the country as a humanitarian gesture is absurd on the face of it. There is no way that is why they want migrants in this country. So do I think, through no fault of their own, if you were any kind of a man and your family was in desperate circumstances and you wanted to save them, you'd come here too, or woman, right? I mean, you'd bring your family. It's not their fault. But I mean, really, the left position on this, what I would consider the proper left position, stop destabilizing their countries, and then they're not going to come here.
Of course.
Most people don't want to leave the place that they're from. I remember, man, when I was directing my first show, there was a janitor. I was directing at a community center. I was 16. And, man, he was an old man working as a janitor. He was from the Philippines, and he was getting close to, he'd done his bit. He was saving that money so he could go home rich, and so he could send money back to relatives all those years. Every time I would see that guy, because he was coming to the end of it, he was going to go home. Couldn't wait. He would always, when he'd see me, I go, hey, how you doing, Mr. Mundell? I'll see you in the Philippines. I'll see you in the Philippines. He couldn't wait. That was all he would ever say to me.
Right.
Most people love where they're from. That's where all their connections are. They're not coming here because, for the Big Macs. That's not why they're coming here. So if you really want to do something about it, again, it goes back to the military-industrial complex. You need to shut down the wars that we wage either overtly or covertly in all of these countries. But are they bringing these people in? Look what just happened with the longshoremen. They would love to have hundreds of thousands of newly documented migrants to compete for those jobs, so that that can't happen. I do believe that's why they're allowing this. That's a legitimate thing. But that is not why they don't have money for North Carolina.
Right.
That is not the reason.
About $1 billion.
But they want to distract you
right.
from the people who are really bankrupting the lower orders of the country. They want to distract you from where the power really lies.
Right. I mean, even if it were true that the $1 billion that was spent on the SSP could have been, let's just say it could have been diverted into the disaster relief division of FEMA. Let's just say that were true. Maybe it is. I don't know that it's not. Doesn't sound like it is, because it sounds like they raised that money for that specific purpose, grant money. But let's just say it is. Let's just say they could have had that $1 billion. Again, the peasant mind to be litigating where they could have come up with this $1 billion, hundreds of billions of dollars on World War III. What the fuck are you arguing about? You're playing their game when you argue about that.
And your man Trump, he's all in on sending that money to Israel.
Right.
With Ukraine, he says 10 different things on 10 different days. It's a
loan. Yeah, right. Yeah, loan.
It's a loan. We'll get it back. Yeah. So he's not looking to repatriate those funds. Right. He's not looking to cut off all that money going to these countries. You gotta just realize your government. If you're a working person in America, your country's not that into you.
Right. Yep.
They don't care about you. They don't want to help you. You're not making them money. You'll take the slop they give you and you'll like it.
Please clap.